Welcome to Sounding Board. This is a weekly community television program produced by club members of Seroptimist International of Novato. The mission of the organization is improving the lives of women and girls through programs leading to social and economic empowerment. My name is Carol Bennett. I'm the moderator today. I'm a retired instructor from Santa Rosa Junior College. I have an exciting guest today. Patricia Spilman is a research scientist up here at the Buck Institute, Research on Aging. Have you ever driven up Highway 101 and looked up on the hills at that beautiful, beautiful building? That's the Buck Institute. Patricia, welcome for being here. And thank you for bringing all your expertise on Alzheimer's disease. It's just, thank you very much.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's wonderful to be here.
Oh, good. You're right. You just came down the hall, though, didn't you?
That's right. I was right nearby.
Good. Well, I want to ask you, first of all, just if you would just tell us how you got attracted, just very shortly, how you got attracted to the field of science in the first place.
Well, my mother was always passionate about science, and it's something she very much wanted one of her daughters to study, and that was me. So I did as an undergraduate, and then I had the wonderful opportunity to do some graduate work in a thesis at the University of California, San Francisco with top scientists, and then that was it. I was in the field, and I love it to this day.
Good. And how did you get involved here at the Buck Institute? Did they come down and find you at the UCSF?
I guess I would say, excuse me, that I found them because I live here in Marin. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. And it was easy for me to travel to UCSF, but I heard about the Buck Institute being built. And it is the only freestanding...
What year was that?
Oh, I think it was opened in 1998.
98, okay.
Yeah. I waited for years hearing about its inception and finally its building. And of course, knowing it was going to be a Buck, the Institute for Research on Aging, one of the diseases they would study would be Alzheimer's disease, which has always been my passion. Mm-hmm. So as soon as there was an opportunity, I applied and I got a position here.
Great. Well, congratulations for having done that. You've been a shining star here, I'm sure, of course, among many stars, but it's like, whatever. Anyway, so tell us about the findings that you've come about and the work that you've done here at the Buck with Alzheimer's disease, and just take it on. Just take it over here.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'd very much like to. Well, Alzheimer's disease is a very complicated disease, something we call multifactorial. And even though a large part of our program here is looking for a new drug to treat Alzheimer's disease, we're not just doing that. We're also targeting all the other factors that may lead to the development and also progression of disease. And there are many. Quality of sleep, nutrition, your socialization, intellectual pursuits, all sorts of things. So what we like to do is combine your whole life or health style with our potential new drug for Alzheimer's disease, because we think that will be the best combination.
Mm-hmm. So there's no big magic cure out there yet?
Well, everybody asks that, and I'd like to tell you that yes, there's one coming, but I think the cure, when it comes, will be a combination of health support by a trained physician and more than one drug or pharmaceutical support. For example, in Alzheimer's disease, a lot of people know there's a finding in the brain tissue of something called plaques, amyloid plaques, and they're comprised of these little fragments, a protein called A-beta. So for years, pharmaceutical companies have targeted the removal of A-beta from the brain, but those drugs actually haven't done that well. Part of the reason is by the time they start treating patients in clinical trials with these anti-A-beta drugs, they're so far along that they already have a lot of damage to the tissue of the brain. And we have a different approach. Here's one way. We do have drugs that we're developing that might lower A-beta, and they're looking very promising. But in addition to that, we have drugs that increase a factor in the brain. It happens to be called SAPP alpha.
What? PTA
Well, that
alpha?
is short for, and we love acronyms in science, soluble amyloid precursor protein alpha.
Oh my.
And in fact, this larger molecule is really good for the brain. It helps the brain maintain those contacts between the cells in the brain that are important for memory, the neurons. They make contacts with each other at a point called the synapse, and SAPP alpha supports the synapse. Right now, we have a drug in clinical trials that increases SAPP alpha and supports brain function. We also have drugs under development that target the stress pathway. People who undergo chronic stress, that's daily stress, often are at higher risk for Alzheimer's disease. One of our potential new therapeutics targets that. And we have a variety of other, what we call targets, for our potential pharmaceuticals. So it could be very much with Alzheimer's disease, like the treatment of AIDS, that it's a combination of several drugs at once that will result in the effect that which we want, which is to arrest disease and restore cognitive function. Of course, that's the word that we use for memory and how we go about our daily life and how we're able to function. And we're very optimistic about that. But as much as we are, because Alzheimer's disease is a disease of aging, people quite often who have Alzheimer's disease have other underlying health issues. And a drug for Alzheimer's disease won't fix all of those. Those too have to be improved for the overall health of the individual to improve who's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And so we spend as much time on an approach to address those issues as we do our pharmaceuticals. And that other program is called MEND, or Metabolic Enhancement for Neurodegenerative Disease. It's really the brainchild, and I think that's a great word, of Dr. Dale Bredesen, who I'm so honored to work for. But I'm, and my colleagues are very involved in that as well, in this way. I personally, and another PhD in our lab, Dr. Ram Rao, give talks to the public throughout the Bay Area on all the things you can do to support your own health and lower your risk for Alzheimer's disease, or significantly delay the onset. And so I really have to say, not all Alzheimer's disease will be eradicated. The greatest risk factor for Alzheimer's disease is advanced age, and we don't want to lower that.
No.
So there'll always be some Alzheimer's disease, but if you can delay it by a decade, I mean, wouldn't you, to have 10 more years of wonderful life? That really is the mission of the Buck Institute, to increase the number of healthy years of life. And I think by supporting our program to lower the risk of Alzheimer's disease, we're really meeting that challenge.
So how does one know when there's a feeling of Alzheimer's? What are the symptoms? What can you look for?
You know, I would say, of course, we think of memory loss, but it is typically when memory impairment affects one's function in day-to-day life that they become concerned. And I will tell you, also quite often, it is a loved one, a spouse, or a child that notices it. Quite often the person who in fact is beginning to show the signs of Alzheimer's disease isn't clearly aware of it. They're often brought into a doctor by a family member.
I've heard that old sort of a joke that if you misplace your watch, you know, that's just aging, that's normal. But if you forget what the watch is for, or the keys, that was another one. If you forget what the keys are for, that's the beginning of Alzheimer's then.
That's absolutely true. When I give my talks, I have a slide where I have a picture of keys. If you don't know where your keys are, not a problem. But then it has a picture of Teddy Roosevelt. And I say, if Teddy Roosevelt is your president, then you have a problem with your memory. Although he even predates everybody that's alive now.
That's right.
I guess you have an even more serious problem. But that's absolutely true. Minor memory loss is part of normal aging. I will say as an aside though, the things that we talk about when we talk about supporting overall health to avoid the risk of Alzheimer's disease also apply to normal cognitive decline with age. It helps with all memory. I think most people would like to have sharper minds and better memories, even if they don't have any sort of disease. So I like that
You
other
mentioned
effect.
stress before as being a real strong contributor.
It is.
Contributor
Yeah.
to Alzheimer's. What about the trend today of people working these 60-hour work weeks? That's a tremendous stress that I don't remember having been pushed on people in earlier days.
I think you're absolutely right. Especially in American society, in Europe as well, people are expected to have very demanding careers and work very, very hard. And life requires balance. And quite often, one of the things that suffers with a long workday is exercise and movement. The human body is meant to move. The brain loves it when the body is moving. And so people often say, I'm too busy to exercise. It's one of the major problems with an extremely stressful job.
Yeah. The other day when we talked, you were talking about the head being attached to or the mind being attached to the body. Yeah. That was talk about that a little bit.
Oh, I know what I had said, and of course this is well known, and I believe it so deeply. Your brain is listening to your body all the time, and deciding, are we really still alive? Are we dancing? Are we learning new things? Are we smelling new things, touching things? Or have we settled down in a chair where maybe we watch something repetitively and letting our world get smaller and smaller and smaller? If the latter is the case, the brain, in a sense, also recedes and gets smaller. It's no longer challenged, doesn't believe the organism is very active anymore. The two absolutely work as a unit, and it's important to keep in mind that your whole body matters. I think one of the most interesting things I heard in an interview with a gerontologist is that he said he would look at his patients' feet because their feet reflect, are they exercising? Do they have cardiovascular disease? That often leads to thicker toenails. Do they have the injuries you get with diabetes? Diabetes is a big risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. Does it look like they still care about themselves? Do they still groom their feet? This lack of enjoyment in everyday life and a feeling of a need to take care of your own health is actually a sign of declining health as well. So I thought that was really interesting. He didn't really mean he can look at somebody's feet and diagnose all things. Right. But that other end of the body, from what I spend all my time thinking about the brain, is so reflective of the whole axis of the entire body.
Now, what about some of these new mind exercising things that are out? That's a lot of hype on that right now.
I'm really glad you asked about that because some recent studies came out that said that brain training software hasn't been proven to enhance mental or cognitive performance. And I always like to say this about that. We don't do anything in isolation. I think that these brain training games will be effective as an overall program to improve your health and your cognitive health. Good nutrition, exercise, socializing, enjoying or playing music, dancing, and doing brain training software. It's very difficult to get synergy when you only look at one factor at a time. I know that the benchmark in science is a controlled study. Everything is the same except for this one factor. I understand that. I have to do that daily when I do my new compound studies. But when we're looking at cognitive function, also look at it in the context of the rest of your life to see if it's effective for you. I would hate for people to be discouraged to use the software if they receive benefit from it.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I hear people put down the use of computers and applications and their iPhone and stuff like that because it's letting the computers do the thinking for the mind. But I used to teach classes at the junior college for seniors on computers. And there was nothing that would be more exciting and challenging to me to watch these people be challenged by learning computers, learning about computers, getting excited, feeling good about themselves, knowing about computers and software, a whole new thing. So I think those things can go hand in hand too. It's not just one thing.
Absolutely. Use the computer as a tool to enhance your life. Yeah. I mean, don't be a slave to it, but use it. You can do incredible artwork on computers, write documents, communicate with your friends and family, which is just so wonderful. There's a lot of terrific things about computers, but don't forget about your life off the screen, so to speak. Get out into nature and visit your friends live and in person, talk on a phone, keep it all in balance, but absolutely use the computer as a tool to enhance your life.
Good. Well, I came to one of the book workshops last weekend, actually, and they were talking about SEEDS as the acronym, and that was social, education, exercise, which you've already talked about. Well, education being keeping the mind alert, and then diet and sleep. Those all kind of weave in with the whole concept of hoping to postpone Alzheimer's?
Absolutely. It's a fun acronym too, isn't it? And it's a simple one for people to remember, and they should, and it's wonderful. And what I'd really like to point out here too, you cannot start too young. Brain health starts from the time we're born, but especially in young adults, they're making all the connections in the brain that will be there when they get older. And that one of the findings of a very famous study called the Nun study showed that the complexity of the nuns' writing when they applied to the convent or theology school is reflective of their lower risk for Alzheimer's disease later, meaning that the complexity of their writing, if it was complex, they had a lower risk later. What that suggests is the brain from the beginning has a lot of healthy connections that are made, and we rely on that with time, and that's called cognitive reserve. You can always build it up. So for each of these things in the acronym, there's a lot to learn about what we really mean by that. And I wanted to say this one thing about diet. I know people think, well, healthy diet, it's a very broad term, but adult onset diabetes, the high sugar diet, and even pre-diabetes with a high blood sugar level, greatly increases the risk for Alzheimer's disease. And I'll give you one small scientific example. Insulin goes into the cell, and when its job is done, it is supposed to be removed by an enzyme called neprilysin. Neprilysin's other job is to get rid of A beta. If there's a lot of A beta, it can't get rid of insulin. If there's a lot of insulin, there's not enough to get rid of A beta. So what you've done is challenge this enzyme to do two major jobs. I'm putting that very simply, but it is a scientific explanation for why diabetes puts a person at high risk for Alzheimer's disease. And in our country, it's really quite a problem right now, and it starts in the young. Our young people have diets that are driving them towards early adult onset diabetes. Mm-hmm.
Now, well, you talked about the other day about there is something that can be done if you find you have Alzheimer's at the very beginning stages, that it's easier to prevent it from happening. But yet, how do we know when we have it? And that kind of confused me a little bit. Help me out there.
Actually, I want to state very clearly, right now, if you are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and appropriate diagnosis is so important. Before somebody quickly tells you you have what is now currently an untreatable and ultimately fatal disease, you want to have the best diagnosis possible. There is no cure for Alzheimer's disease right now, even with our own program. We are just now having people participate that have been diagnosed with early Alzheimer's disease. But let's roll back a little bit.
Okay.
There's a condition called mild cognitive impairment. In limited studies, it is very limited right now, a very complex problem that addresses all of the factors that are thought to lead to Alzheimer's disease has resulted in some cognitive impairment in individuals that have come in with mild cognitive impairment and adhered to the program. And then we can roll back farther to what's called self-reported memory loss. Those people do even better. Their family hasn't even noticed yet. It's something that bothers them. What's great about those individuals when they join the program is they're so willing to do whatever it takes to improve their health. And it's
going to have a whole lineup of people after that.
Well, okay, I do have to say, don't start ringing the phones off the hook, the Buck Institute. These are very limited studies. The people participating are largely in them, but this is the wonderful thing that Dr. Bredesen is doing, is he is educating physicians throughout the world. He just spent quite a lot of time in England.
Interesting.
Even spoke to the Royal Academy. He is training physicians throughout the world how to administer this program. And it does, part of it is that each individual has to get a panel of blood tests. They're kind of complicated. They have to undergo cognitive testing and quite often what we call imaging, a variety of studies where we look in the brain, so to speak, PET scans and MRIs and such. It's not an easy task, but this disease isn't going to be an easy one to get, a good hold of.
Wow, scary. Have you had somebody with Alzheimer's in your family?
Interestingly, well, first of all, yes, my father-in-law. But interestingly, my passion for addressing the problem of this disease came long before I met my husband. And it was very simply this. I was with a friend at the dinner table with his extended family, and his aunt burst into tears, and she touched her husband, and she said, my husband is sitting next to me, but the man that I love is gone.
Oh,
and
dear.
I said, it's funny, it gives me the chills just to say it again. And I said, what is this? And to me, as a scientist and somebody who fell in love with the brain in college, I thought to lose your cognitive abilities and to really cease to be who you are as a person is such an affront to your humanity. I really, really wanted to do something about it. It was only later I met my husband and also discovered his grandfather and his dad just died of Alzheimer's disease. So it has a very immediate importance to me as well. But as it should to all of us, the number of cases of Alzheimer's disease will increase as our population ages. And we've actually had so much luck with treating cardiovascular disease through a variety of means, and even cancer, that people are living to advanced age and then therefore have a higher risk of Alzheimer's disease.
Sure.
I mean, it's a risk we're willing to take, but nonetheless, we'd like it to be lower for everybody.
The longer we live, the more chances we
That's
have
right.
of having some problem at
That's
the
right.
end.
That's right.
Well, what's exciting happening here at the Buck right now with it? What are you excited about?
Oh, well, on the lab bench, I could
Yeah.
say in our drug studies, we're very, very close to having a drug that also increases SAPP alpha, that's even more effective than the one that we had previously go into clinical trials. It's getting very close to that stage. On its heels, we have a specific compound that lowers A beta in a way that is more safe than previous methods, and it's doing very well. It's under study right now. It's looking very, very promising. And then just a little bit back behind that, and I mean by its development, has to go through many steps, a drug that does address the stress pathway, again, in a very safe way. And of course, when the time comes to use such a drug like that, a patient would have to be very carefully screened to see that that is indeed a risk factor for them. You never want to take a drug that you don't need. And then, as I mentioned just a moment ago, as for the MEND program, I just got to see this amazing software Dr. Bredesen developed with a company called MPI, and saw the analysis of a patient. And what really meant a lot to me is he pointed out a few things about this patient. For example, the gentleman appeared to have from his blood work perhaps an unresolved infection somewhere, likely the sinuses or orally, not uncommon in older people. And the inflammation that results from infection can exacerbate, and that means accelerate, the onset of Alzheimer's disease. Well, here's a short answer to that. How do we identify and effectively address these infections in older people? That could be part now of a way to treat, or at least lower the risk of Alzheimer's disease that has perhaps been overlooked in the past. And I even want to find ways to test that hypothesis to see if we can slow down the disease.
You know, Patricia, it's time for us to kind of wrap this up. Would you believe it? This just went by so fast.
Nice.
So if you were to really take some of the major points that you'd like to leave with our listening audience today, what would it be?
Well, absolutely continue to support research on Alzheimer's disease and the therapeutics. As much as I believe in the support of health, a therapeutic will be needed. Some sort of drug will be needed. We can't address everything. Some people have risk factors that cannot be addressed with health style changes. But again, having said that, and I know people hear it so often, right? Quality sleep, expand your mind, always keep learning new things, have a healthy diet, please reduce your sugars. And maybe people are tired of hearing about exercise, but I loved, somebody said this, If exercise could be put in a pill, it would be the most powerful drug ever invented by man.
Good one.
It would even beat aspirin and antibiotics. So don't keep saying, not you, but one should not keep saying they don't have time. Make time. Walk a dog, dance, do whatever you can. Just keep moving.
Fabulous. You've been fabulous. This is just zipped by. I can't believe how fast today has
really
gone.
Fun to talk to you.
Well, thank you very much, Patricia Spilman, for being here, research scientist from the Buck Institute, Research on Aging. And thank you to our listening audience for sure. And thank you, Freda Kaplan and Madeline Peters, who are in the back room, in the studio room. They're doing all the work for us. And Leon Johnson, our technician, who really pulls it all together, our technical engineer. And thanks to the Buck Institute, Research on Aging, for letting us use their beautiful, beautiful television studio. We really love being up here. Thank you.